Good morning. Wow, pleasure to see you all. On behalf of the Kuwaiti Association for Learning Differences and myself, Dr. Huda Shaban, the Director of the Growth and Development Department and the General Forum Coordinator, we would firstly like to welcome all of you to the KALD Educational Training Forum. The Kuwaiti Association for Learning Differences, KALD, is a non-profit organization which has been established in 2007 by Mrs. Amal As-Sayer, the chairwoman, with the help of a number of volunteers, and was funded by Mashari' al-Khair and Kuwait Project Company. Continuously, KALD's mission has been considered the blueprint of all our events and accomplishments. We believe that students with learning difficulties and ADHD can succeed in school and work, can enjoy a fulfilling social life, and can be active members in the society if their challenges are understood and their needs are met. What is KALD in a glance?
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. لو أرجع معكم بالذاكرة إلى الوراء تقريباً أكثر من 10 سنوات، أتخيل روحي في ممرات وزارة التربية وممرات الهيئة العامة لشؤون ذوي الإعاقة وأيضاً وزارة الشؤون. وقتها كنت أسأل نفسي أنت وين رايحة؟ شنو بالضبط بتسوين؟ صدقوني لو أقول لكم وقتها ما كنت أعرف الجواب، بس اللي كنت أعرفه ومتأكدة منه إني عاهدت ربي إني أسوي شيء، أي شيء، علشان أقدر أنتشر كل أسرة من بداية الاكتشاف، من أول لحظة تشعر الأم إن ابنها أو بنتها فيهم شيء مختلف، إلى بر الأمان، ويلاقون الوعي ويلاقون الأسلوب اللي يقدرون يتعايشون فيه مع التحديات اللي تواجههم والوضع الجديد الغريب عليهم. في هذا الوقت ظهرت للنور الجمعية الكويتية لاختلافات التعليم. مرت تقريباً 8 سنوات من العمل الجاد على الجمعية، ولا زالت مخلصة للفئات المستهدفة والمستفيدة من خدماتها. أولاً الطالب ذو الذكاء المتوسط وما فوق المتوسط، لكن في نفس الوقت لديه مشكلة في التحصيل الدراسي، بالإضافة إلى قصور في المهارات الاجتماعية التي تجعل أمامه صعوبة كبيرة في تكوين الأصدقاء، بالإضافة إلى تدني ثقته في نفسه. توجهت لهم الجمعية في مخيمات تستضيف البنين وأخرى تستضيف البنات، بعضها داخل الكويت وبعضها خارج الكويت، بالإضافة إلى كرنفال سنوي يستضيف الطالب وأسرته. ثم مسرح للمواهب، نعطي فرصة للطالب أن يقول للعالم أنا عندي مميزات، بالإضافة إلى الصعوبة اللي عندي. كانت الجمعية في بداياتها تستضيف 10 إلى 12 طالب، أما الآن فهي تستضيف عشرات الطلاب. المستفيد الثاني من خدمات الجمعية هو ولي الأمر، القلق دائما على حاضر ومستقبل ابنه. توجهنا لهم في جماعات دائمة تقام شهريا ومحاضرات دخلنا فيها إلى المدارس، بالإضافة إلى ملتقيات تقام مرة أو مرتين في السنة، ونستضيف فيها متخصصين من داخل وخارج الكويت. نفتخر أن أول ما ابتدينا كان عدد أولياء الأمور بالعشرات، أما الآن فلدينا تعاون مع مئات من أولياء الأمور. أما المستفيد الثالث من خدمات الجمعية فهو من كاد أن يكون رسولا، المعلم. فقد شارك حوالي 4000 من المعلمين والاختصاصيين النفسيين والاجتماعيين في ورشات العمل والبرامج التدريبية وأيضاً المؤتمرات الدولية التي نظمتها الجمعية. وفي هذا العام أردنا تكريمهم بإطلاق جائزة المعلم المتميز في تعليم ذوي صعوبات التعلم واضطراب تشتت الانتباه وفرط النشاط، والتي تقام للمرة الأولى في الكويت والعالم العربي تحت رعاية سيدي صاحب السمو أمير البلاد حفظه الله ورعاه.
Very inspiring, isn't it? Honestly, it's a pleasure to see that many dedicated educators, professionals, and college students attending this event, all eager to stay updated on the latest research and practical strategies in the educational field, mainly in the field of learning difficulties and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And we are honored to have Dr. Parker and Dr. Aguirre, our keynote speakers, joining us today to share their valuable knowledge and expertise. Throughout KALD Training Educational Forum, Dr. Parker and Dr. Aguirre will be highlighting two major strands, which recently research shed lights on their important effects on students' academic performance. One, how executive functions deficits such as time management, attention, planning, organization, and remembering details would limit student ability to succeed. This topic will be addressed by Dr. David Parker. Two, how emotional regulation affects a student's motivation, which will be discussed by Dr. Blaise Aguirre. There will be three 2-hour workshops or 6 training hours that will tackle in depth each strand. The first introductory workshops which will take place today in this auditorium, and it will give you the flavor of each topic. Today's workshop will help you decide which intensive training you would like to attend tomorrow. On Saturday, Dr. Parker will continue handling the executive function and self-determination in the auditorium, while Dr. Blaise will be addressing the emotional regulation in the multipurpose room located outside this building in the central hallway. A certificate of attendance signed by KALD, chairperson, and the AUK president will be granted to you, mentioning the number of professional hours you have attended. If you attend Friday's session, the certificate will mention only 5 professional development hours. However, if you attend 2 days, your certificate will reflect 11 PD hours. To be able to keep track for your PD hours, an attendance sheet will be passed around during the lecture, so make sure you note your name down. Hopefully, you will find this forum interesting, and you will be able to go back to your schools and your workplaces on Sunday, equipped with a new knowledge and new understanding of LD and ADHD. Before leaving you with Dr. Blaise, I would like to extend our warm appreciation to our sponsors, mainly our host, the American University of Kuwait, and the AUK President, Dr. Nizar Hamza. Fatma Clinic and Dr. Fatma Al-Awadi, KALD Vice Chairperson, the Kuwaiti Foundation for the Advancement of Sciences, and certainly our mentor, Mrs. Amal Sayer, the Kuwaiti Association for Learning Differences Chairperson. As well, we're really thankful for our volunteers, these young adults who are our hope for a better future, who joined us from Bayan Bilingual School, thank you, and from the University of Technology in Sydney, Australia, and from the American International School to ensure a smooth run of the event. They're wearing white KALD vests and willing to answer all your queries. Finally, I would like to acknowledge all the schools who have contributed in this event's success. I wish you a pleasant experience and would like to invite you to our first workshop, which will be presented by Dr. Blaise Aguirre on regulating emotions in adolescent and college-age adults. Dr. Blaise is an expert in child, adolescent, and adult psychotherapy. He's an assistant professor at Harvard Medical School and the founding medical director of 3 East at McLean University. So please welcome Dr. Blaise Aguirre.
Thank you very much, Huda, for inviting me again this year. And so it's the second time in Kuwait, and I'm really loving it even more the second time. Ms. Al-Sayer, thank you so much for being the sponsor, American University of Kuwait and KALD. Now, apparently, I have a friend here, Nabila, who always gives me a lot of trouble in a lot of my talks. And I think she hides her face so that she thinks I'm not going to recognize her, but I hear her voice, you know. She talks. She says I've put on a lot of weight from the last time. But you know, what happened is I actually, when I came in, I was very thin. But they fed me so much in the last 2 days that this is what happens with very good Kuwaiti food. So this is... Now, yesterday they were saying that... I'll tell you about that in a second. So let me just tell you a little bit about 3 East. So 3 East is a unit that we've opened up, and we get patients from all over the world to treat adolescents who are very, very suicidal. And we're getting a lot, including from the Middle East. And it's, depending on the statistic that you look at, it's the second leading cause of death in adolescence. So first is accidents, and then either, depending on the statistics, second or third leading cause of death. And in the United States, about 16% of adolescents in any given year will say that they have seriously considered taking their own lives. I want you to have ideas with you so that when you leave here, this wasn't just an interesting conference, but something that you're going to say, you know what, that was something I really need to pay attention to. And one of the important concepts, I think, is that most of what we do in our lives is mindless. It's just habit. We do things repetitively, just the way that we do things. But when you're sitting there calmly, because that is your habit, no one complains about it. The ADHD and the LD kid who's jumping up and down and bouncing, that's just their brain wiring. That's just the way that their brain works, and that's their habit. That's their repetitive practice. The child with ADHD and with LD doesn't wake up in the morning and say, you know what, I have a very nice life. I don't get bullied at school. I think I'm going to go to school and be very disruptive in my class or be disruptive to my parents. That is not the child's intent. It is doing what its brain is telling it to do. And so the compassionate view is that this is just a child trying to do the best that it can with the brain that it has. And so, you know, when you walk, you don't think about how do I walk? You just walk. We don't have to think about it because we're just wired for walking. But if you break your leg and suddenly you have to walk, then you start thinking about it. So we don't think about the things that people don't point out. So now, yesterday somebody was telling me that it was very cold last night. Did people think it was cold last night? Let me just tell you something. This was Monday. This Monday, I had to, before I got to the airport, I had to come and, I was at work, my work is up this hill, and I had to come down, and nobody else was there, and I had to dig my car out. It's an all-wheel drive, so thank God for that, but out of a meter of snow. So that was cold. Yeah, last night was very nice. Thank you very much for last night. So these are the things that I'm going to talk about, you know, understanding emotions, the function of emotions, and how we get children to regulate. But why? I mean, this is a conference on LD and ADHD. So why are we talking about emotions in this conference? And if you consider that anything that you learn, whether it's a language, a mathematical ability, a sport, is a skill, that emotion regulation is also something that you can break down, operationalize, and learn how to do. But most of us who are angry, and then we don't get angry anymore, or calm down, or you're sad and you calm down, you never say to yourself, oh, how did I do that? I don't know how I did that. We take it for granted that we're just able to do it. And it doesn't become a problem unless a child is unable to do that. And like with any other skill, if you're learning how to regulate your emotions, learning any ability, whether you're learning how to play the piano, mathematics, learn English, play a sport, it's going to be compromised by having things like ADHD and LD. And now here's another important idea, and that is this. And this is whether you like it or whether you don't like it, and that is, it is my belief that when you invite me here in 5 more years, Nabila's going to make sure, and what we're going to see over time is that contemporary technology, the way that people are communicating with each other, is going to start impacting the way that especially young children are learning how to regulate their skills. It's remarkable that 2-year-olds, you can see them on iPads, and they're able to move things. 2-year-olds, I mean, think of yourself at 2 years old. I mean, first of all, there were no iPads. You could barely turn a paper, but 2-year-olds are able to do this. They're able to manipulate iPads, and I'll talk a little bit more about this in a second. So, developmentally, like, you know, you sort of think, well, oh, okay, how is it that I am able to calm myself when I'm angry, or you know, control myself when I'm sad, or feeling joy or disgust or any kind of emotion? How is it that that happens? And typically what happens between a child and a caregiver, mother, grandparent, or whatever it is that the child has a feeling that shows up in its brain in some context. You know, maybe it's hungry and the mother feeds it. Hungry, mother feeds it. Hungry, mother feeds it. Or it's running around, falls down, and the mother picks it up and says, "Oh, I'm so sorry. You're hurt and you're sad." And or you know, your friend said something horrible to you, and then you get angry, and the parent validates it. Says, "Yes, what you're experiencing makes sense. That's the way to feel, and it's okay, I'll take care of you, and you're safe." So the child in a safe environment learns how to recognize that what it's feeling inside makes sense in the context, and gets reinforcement from the parent, from the mother, and says, anyway, that's the emotion, and you're sad. Oh, you're so sad. Oh, that makes you angry. And so, yeah, so the child begins to learn how to label these emotions in their mind. And so there's this feedback loop, you know, every time I get sad, I fall down, my mother says, "Oh, you're sad," and that, so I get reinforced, this sense of sadness becomes a real thing in my own head. And I can then go, if I fall in my friend's house and I'm sad, that still makes sense, that I'm still sad there. I don't have to only be sad in the context of my mother. I can internalize what that emotion is within me. Now, often what happens, and we see this a lot in the ADHD kids, because on my unit, we see many of the kids who are very suicidal also have ADHD and learning disabilities, and that is this, is that the child has ADHD. So two things begin to happen. One is the mother says, "Okay, go and clean up your room," but the child hasn't heard that. It hasn't heard it because it's distracted. And so what happens is, the mother says, or the father, "Go and clean up your room. I told you once, I told you 100 times. I said, go and clean up your room." and then the child, and then the mother gets angry at him. But then some other time, maybe the child is paying attention and then goes and cleans up the room and then gets reinforced with that and say, oh, well done, you cleaned up your room. So sometimes my mother gets really angry when she tells me to clean up my room, and other times she's very calm, and other times she doesn't even seem to care about it. So what happens with these ADHD kids is that they're getting, rather than, oh, you fell down, I'm sorry, oh, you fell down, I'm sorry, or you fell down, I'm sorry, is sometimes what they're getting is, you fell down, listen, it was your fault because you didn't take your medication, or you're being very hyperactive, you shouldn't be jumping up and down on your bed, or whatever. So it starts to get punished for some of those feelings, and then it doesn't learn to internalize like what it's feeling. It doesn't learn to self-validate. It doesn't learn to have this recognition, and it's transactional. I mean, they say a lot of mental illness and insanity is genetic. You get it from your children. So, so it's this idea that you're doing something, and it's upsetting to the child. And the child's doing something that's upsetting to you, and so there's this negative transaction that's sort of taking place, and then you're getting, sometimes the only way you'll get your child's attention is to yell, and so you get reinforced for yelling, and then the child again doesn't learn to regulate its emotions. Now, one of the things, I was at a conference, and one of the teachers said to these kids were sort of in the back and they were a bit distracted. They say, "Hey, pay attention." Any teacher says pay attention? Who are the teachers? Come on, show yourself. All right. So you say pay attention. Now here's the thing. The child is actually paying attention. It's just not paying attention to what you want them to pay attention to. It's paying attention to something out there or something over here. What you're saying is not pay attention. They're paying attention. Pay attention to me. Pay attention to what I want you to pay attention to. Context begins to matter. So if the idea is that it's not that they're doing this through some evil reason to get back at you, but this is just the brain. So these emotion regulation skills, ADHD, learning disabilities, all begin to impact the developing brain very, very early on. And typically what happens in a lot of communities is that these are the kids that nobody wants. I mean, they might be funny sometimes because they're disruptive in class and they say something silly and everybody laughs, but they don't have that many friends. And so a lot of these kids end up coming to me, they become much more depressed, much more anxious, and then they tend to be put on a lot more medication. So now not only do you have the ADHD and the learning disabilities, but then you've got other major mood disorders, and then when nobody likes them and nobody wants them, they start turning to drugs and all these other things, and now they're with the friends that nobody wants them to have. So their lives started off with this tiny little baby, brain developing in a different kind of way, and now they're hanging out with people you don't want them spending time with, on medication, without friends, getting bullied in school, and sort of stuff. So the idea is that we make these distinctions between these mood disorders and learning difficulties and ADHD, and we need to make those things because we want to know what we're strategizing, but they all really impact each other. You don't really get this pure case of someone who's just got a learning disability or just has ADHD. I always look at these studies and they say, we found these 20 kids with ADHD and nothing else. So really? I mean, I'd love to meet this kid because hard to find. They often have lots of other things, how they see themselves, their own self-esteem, their own ability to address their own sadness. So this idea that we can begin to teach in schools emotion regulation. Now, typically, as I say, that this happens under normal course of development at home, in systems where they can get this feedback. And I think that the nuclear family has really, really worsened this, especially in places like the United States and other places where there isn't the village to take care of the child. Really familiar people who are consistently in the child's life. And so what's happening is that we're finding that schools are now becoming places where a lot of mental health issues are becoming addressed. And you know, we do these fitness and exercise curriculums, but we're also talking about doing mental health and mental wellness curriculums in schools, so that, you know, we can really start talking and teaching kids from, you know, some very basic ideas that are easy to implement in schools right now, and and with pretty immediate sort of effect. So it's not like, okay, you know, you're going to have to do this for 5 years and maybe the kid will be a bit, but you can start doing something right away to help. And so what we teach is that there are what we call primary emotions, and these are just hardwired. And this is something that no matter, you know, you find them universally, that you know, things like anger, sorrow, joy, fear, disgust, that they'll show up in any culture. Now, how they show up might be different, but that they show up, that's just built into our DNA. Everybody has these sort of primary emotions. Now, who are the therapists in the room? Therapists, psychologists, social workers. Come on, show me. Okay. Now, I want you to think about this question. As you think about yourselves, especially the therapist, it's probably true of anybody who's in this room, but compared to your group of friends and other people you know, would you consider yourself more or less emotionally sensitive? Who considers themselves, compared to their group of friends, more emotionally sensitive? Hands up. Who is less emotionally sensitive? Less emotionally sensitive. And what about the rest of you? Because like only like 3 people put up their hand. Wait, this isn't how to get into Harvard lecture. That's we're doing next year. So, I mean, by emotionally sensitive is, do you feel things deeply within yourself? Like you feel things quicker? That things, like once you have a feeling, it tends to stick around. You're still angry about that thing that happened, you know, 6 years ago when your husband gave you a bad look, and, you know, okay, now we're seeing a lot of nodding of heads, okay. So, now that's nothing wrong with that, as long as, you know, it doesn't impact your life. And most of us who do this work are very passionate about it and are very emotionally sensitive and very emotionally connected. Now, but what's interesting is this, and that is, if you just look at the neurobiology of what an emotion looks like, so you see anger. You know, someone says, "Hey, stupid, get angry," right? So if you look at anger, an emotion left to its own devices lasts for 7 to 20 seconds. That's as long as it should take. It should be, oh, okay, now it's done. But why does it feel like it stays for days and years? It's because often we keep on playing and thinking about these things. Oh, I still remember. Man, do you remember what they did? And you still remain, you know, angry. So these are instant. So I have a patient, and she says, well, you know, I just don't like anger. So I'm just not going to get angry. I said, this is remarkable. I said, listen, you and me, we're going to go to Oslo and win the Nobel Prize in medicine, because if you can show me how to get rid of a primary emotion, then you've done something that I don't know. Because this is just built in, and we need this. Without this, we aren't going to survive. These are primary, so-called primary emotions. What gets children and all the rest of us into trouble are what we call secondary emotions. And these are the emotional reactions to primary emotions. So these aren't hardwired, but they're learned from our families, our culture, and other people. A primary emotion is what happens when you don't pay attention to your primary emotion. So what happens is, you know, you get the kid with ADHD, and it doesn't have any friends. So what would be a normal emotional experience for a person who doesn't have friends? Sadness, right. But what happens is now he's feeling sad, starts to cry. Oh, you're a baby. You're crying in class. Doesn't want to have sadness. Doesn't want to pay attention to the sadness. He's being teased and bullied at school. So what shows up? Anger, violence, right. You know, so he goes and beats up some other kid, hits some other kid. And so, and those secondary emotions tend to stick around for a lot longer, and they're the ones that get kids into trouble. So rather than paying attention to the primary emotion, that it makes sense that the child would be sad, and then what happens is it gets punished because he hit another kid. Now, I'm not saying he should go around hitting other kids, but now you're not dealing with the fact that the child's actually sad, that if you could address the sadness, the secondary emotion wouldn't show up or be able to manage it a lot better. But we focus so much on the secondary emotion that we don't pay attention to the primary emotion. And by the way, if something doesn't make sense while I'm talking about it, I really, really want you to put up your hand and just say, you know, repeat that again, ask a question, interact with me. And if you start to fall asleep, I might call you up onto stage and do a bit of a role play. So stay alert, you know, put matchsticks like that so that I can, yes? I have no problem with that, yeah, okay. So I'll get to Dr. Shaban to, okay, it'll be posted on the KALD website. Okay, was there another question? No, okay. So you might not be expressing your primary emotion for a variety of reasons. So habit, again, emotional blocks from childhood, that I am just, as a boy, I'm not going to show that I am sad. I'm just going to block that. In the environment, it's just not acceptable, you know, like boys don't cry or something like that. So a defining characteristic is that it does not pass. It tends to stick around for a long time. They're problematic and they interfere with us acting on primary emotions in healthy ways. So rather than saying, you know what, I'm sad and I really know that this really hurts to be bullied and to be teased at school, these secondary emotions get in the way and then prevents us from dealing with the primary emotions. And they often cause damage to ourselves and our relationships. So not only are you being bullied at school, but you're also the troublemaker. It's a bad situation for you if you've got ADHD, LD. And so, in primary and secondary emotions, there's just like all these. I mean, people can have all sorts of names for them, and they're just messy combinations of descriptions of how people feel. You say, how do you feel? I feel hatred, anger, anxiety, worry, insecurity. And sometimes, I mean, secondary emotions can also be, the primary emotions can also be secondary emotions. Okay, so like very early on, I mean, I saw this photo and I thought, my goodness, I mean, here you can see how early on, I mean, emotions are starting to show up. This little girl over there, it's like, what are you doing taking my boyfriend, you know? He goes on to run for president of the United States, I think. No, I'm just teasing too. Yeah, it's like it's there very, very early on. So, what are some healthy perspectives on emotions? So, the other thing that we've done on our unit is we've gotten away from this idea of good or bad. It just totally done away with this judgment. It's actually not that useful. They're imposters. They actually disrupt your ability to know someone and to understand someone by saying, oh, what you're doing is good or what you're doing is bad. You know, so you know, if you go to a funeral and you're sad and you're feeling sad, you know, it makes sense that you would be feeling sad. And now, if you were the only person laughing and you say, well, I'm very happy that he's dead because he had high blood pressure and diabetes, you know, you say, well, that person isn't acting correctly in that moment. So there's a time and place and context that it matters. And it's just what the body is doing. It's just what the brain is doing. I mean, the brain is just creating emotions and thoughts just because that's what brains do. The same way that the stomach creates a lot of juices. And last night my stomach had to create a lot of juices for all the food that I was being served by. But there's a difference, and this is where we get to start, that the fact that you have the emotion and the thought, I am so angry that they're teasing me because I'm jumping up and down and I have no friends and I want to punch someone. There's a difference between having the emotion and acting on the emotion. Now that's a big difference. And so that's where you'll also learn a lot from Dr. Parker in terms of how do you begin to control. It's this idea of control, so the idea of noticing. That's what I'm saying. We live these mindless lives, paying attention. There's anger. Oh, it's shown up again. Those bullies, it's showing up. There's anger. It's in my mind. It's anger. It's just an emotion showing up. I don't have to behave in a predictable way. I don't have to behave in ways that are going to get me into further trouble. I don't have to make my situation even worse than it already is. I have enough problems as it is. That emotions don't last forever. Nothing does. Nothing lasts forever. It's all going to pass. But when you're, Einstein had this saying about relativity, and he said, 1 minute of your hand in a fire feels like an hour, but 1 hour with your hand in the hand of a pretty girl feels like 1 minute. And so this idea that, for a lot of people who have very intense emotions, when you're in that emotion, it feels as if it's always been there. And so when I speak to a lot of the kids who are very suicidal, and I say, how long have you been depressed? They say, all my life. I mean, all my life. That is so sad. And even if it's not true, even if it's just been 3 hours, when you are in that state, if you can say, okay, we had a wonderful dinner again last night. I keep talking about the dinner. But 10 minutes of that dinner was just incredible. If you've got a bad toothache and you can't get to the dentist or anything, and you feel 10 minutes of a bad toothache, forget about it. That's like, feels like it's been on you. You say to somebody, what was that 10 minutes? Time it. Was it the same time? It feels so much longer. When you feel emotions very intensely, especially emotions you don't like, they feel like forever. But the idea is that it will pass. Everything passes. That when a strong emotion comes, you don't have to act on the feeling. That really something that's very powerful is just observing the feeling, just noticing it. Right. So the thing about so what are typical? Maybe people could put up their hands. Typical reactions to anger. I noticed you asked me that question. Now I'm angry that you asked me that question. I told you that you should ask me, but I'm angry that you asked me that question. Okay. Now, what are some reactions? What could I do? Yeah. Snapping. Why did you ask me that question? What else? Yelling, shouting. You can get very aggressive. You can, give. So what happens is that those things are often absolutely paired as if they're the same thing. But, you can have the thought of going out and having something to eat right now, but you could just say, I just had that thought. But then you can do one of two things. You can get up and go and get something to eat, or you can stay seated there and say, I had that thought. So in the same way, I notice anger. I'm really angry. But, what is the effective thing? What is the right thing to do? Is to begin to put a separation and a break between that, having that emotion, and having the response to that emotion. And with ADHD kids, it is very, very difficult because it seems like those two things are paired. And so teaching them that does not have to be the case, that you can have an emotion, be able to step back on it, notice it, and then decide. I mean, you still might go and hit the kid, but it is much more effective to have thought about it first. I don't want anyone to say that I'm suggesting we should be hitting. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, absolutely. No, so this is the primary emotions. Oh, so the question is, I'll repeat the question. So the question is that the way that you react to emotions, is that, how's that, is that taught by your parents and all of these sorts of things? It's a really important question. And the truth of the matter is, yes, it's taught by lots of different things. It's taught by your parents, by your culture, by your experiences. And you know, so there are some cultures that are just much more stoic and don't display any emotion. That doesn't mean to say that they aren't having the emotion. It just means that they're not displaying it. Some parents are much more nurturing. Some parents are much more punitive. And so, yes, the emotion, like if everybody has the thought, you know, think of a pink kangaroo, you can all be thinking of a pink kangaroo. Quite what your pink kangaroo looks like in your own mind is going to be shaped by lots of things, even like the thought of, why is this crazy guy saying I should think of a pink kangaroo? So how it's manifest is going to be different depending on culture and experiences and all of those sorts of things. But that you have it is there. So the question is going to be, what does it look like for you? And so you get to know your own minds. And I was actually at a school in South Africa teaching this stuff. I say, what is your experience during sadness? And there were 50 girls, and 48 of them said that they cried. But 2 of them said that they only cry when they get angry. So the important thing is for them to know that and for the others to know is that when they're crying, that means that they're angry, whereas for the rest of them it's sadness. It's like, okay, what's it like for you? It's not to say that that's the right way or that's the wrong way to do it. Okay. So emotions are facts. And although they powerfully feel like just the truth. So here's just a very simple way in which you can change language. When you use the I statement, like I am a psychiatrist, that is consistent with my enduring identity. That is what I am. I am male. I live in Boston underneath the snow. That feels like forever. It's not actually, you know. But I am male. I am a psychiatrist. I am heavier than I was a couple of years ago. Thank you, Nabila. So these, but when you say, I am sad, that makes it essentially the core and the person that you are. There's a difference between saying, I am that thing, because if I say, I am walking, well, I've stopped walking, so I am not walking. You know, but to say, I am sad, so you say, I feel sadness. So you start to make a distinction between your core sense of that, so that it's not, you and sadness are not the same thing. If they look up in the dictionary sadness, they're not going to have a picture of you. So it's to start making this thing, you say, okay, you're saying, I am sad. It's to say, I feel, I'm noticing the experience of sadness coming within me. And the important is it's to break the habit of mindlessness and to begin to experience your emotions in a different way, especially if you don't have language for them. But you cannot get rid of emotions because they serve important survival functions. And I mean, you wouldn't survive without emotions. You cannot fall in love. You cannot run away. You cannot, fight for what you want. So what are they good for? Because a lot of people, especially if you experience them very, very intensely, and I mean, the kids that I get on my unit experience them so intensely. Has anybody had been burnt? Like, you know, you put your hand in a fire or you touch something and it's really painful, 3rd-degree burns. And you blow air over that burn and it is painful. It hurts so much. And like when you have very intense emotions, it's like that. It's that they're so intolerable, even happiness. And so kids just want to do everything that they can to get away with it. And so on my unit, it gets so bad that they want to kill themselves, which is really sad. And you know, a couple of years ago when I came here, it was so surprising how many kids from the Middle East were coming to our unit, because I thought of the culture of having big families taking care of children would protect them from a lot of these kinds of thoughts. But the influences of drugs and disrupted families and social media and a lot of these other things, you know, they impact the child's brain no matter where they are. Now, it might be true that the statistics are much lower here, but we're seeing a lot of kids coming over with these kinds of problems. So the 3 jobs of emotions are that they communicate and influence others, organize and motivate action, and can be self-validating. So now, emotions are communicate most powerfully by our faces, our voice tone, volume, our posture, and our gestures. And often people can tell what you're feeling, even if you're trying to hide it or you're unaware of it. And that is because over many thousands of years of the development of the brain, very early on, the infant is staring very intensely at its mother's face, and it's getting feedback all the time, and it's getting reinforced, and this feedback happens thousands of times a second, really, you know, incredibly fast. And this type of nonverbal communication, you know, is it's built into how our brains develop. So you can communicate an incredible amount of information without saying anything. If I'm going, you know, like somebody just walked in, like, wow, what's he scared of? I don't have to say, I am scared. I don't have to use words. And so my problem with a lot of what's happening with social media and WhatsApp and texting and everything is I text you, I am angry at you, but you've gone to sleep. And so you wake up in the morning and there's the text, I am angry at you. And then you call me and you say, hey, why are you angry at me? I say, no, that was yesterday, I'm feeling pretty good now. And so there's no real-time mechanism of feedback that's happening between you and that other person. It's delayed, but even if you're getting it instantly, the context doesn't necessarily make sense. Oh, you're mad at me? But if you're having a discussion with someone, I'm mad at you, oh, what's going on, and everything. But now you're texting, and then they're texting, but it's little like 3 or 4 sentences, and what do you mean by that? And, you know, all of this goes on. And we're not getting all the things that our brain was actually built to do, which is to pay attention to little changes in facial features to understand what's going on in the mind of the other person. We're understanding what's going on in the mind of the iPhone. So, you know, that's one of the things it does, communication. It communicates, she is angry that she has to go to school, so she kicks the school. So that's one of the purposes of emotions. They motivate to act now, to pay attention, to change a situation. And they serve you time so you don't have to think about everything. So a big lion that is hungry comes into this room, and I think, oh, I wonder why there is a lion here in Kuwait, and I wonder why it's hungry and comes. So you just, emotion, boom, you're out the door. You start running. So you don't have to spend a lot of cognitive time processing, like, you know, cognitive executive function, a much higher order thinking. You have to spend a lot more time pondering and wondering. You don't need to do that under certain circumstances. And strong emotions help overcome mental and physical obstacles. And every now and then I read about, like these tragic stories about a mom who left her child and fell underneath the car, and something happens and they're able to lift the car off the child. And they say, well, how the heck did you do it? I'd never be able to do it again. It's just like the surge that emotions are able to get a person to run faster, jump higher, and do all of those sorts of things in order to avoid escape a threat. It's probably through the connection with adrenaline and other hormones. And so, sort of thinking about why the rhino is chasing, I wonder why you want to run. So then there's validation. And emotions can be information about a situation. So that if I am afraid, I can learn to say that it makes sense that I should be afraid. And it's so this is one of the things that we tend to do to people. They feel sad about something that seems trivial to you. That they had their pet goldfish died. You can get goldfish anywhere, So what? Oh, come on, you can get a goldfish anywhere you want. Don't be so stupid, don't be so silly about that. It's going to be okay. But for you, that's what you feel. Is to say, like that doesn't mean I have to feel sad about it, but that's what the other person feels. And so you learn to self-validate that this is what I feel like in these circumstances. But the other problem is that with very powerful emotions is that people begin to fear things that aren't actually happening. So that I'm afraid that people hate me. I'm afraid that people are going to leave me. I'm afraid. So just the fact that you're noticing something doesn't mean that it is true that thing is happening. So to sort of be able to teach the kids, okay, I am worried that the kids are going to bully me. So if it's never happened, we have a young lady in our unit right now, and she is constantly worried that kids are going to bully her, and she has never ever been bullied. But it's so she feels that. However, she hasn't been bullied. So just because she fears it doesn't mean that the fact of it is true. Okay, now. Every emotion has an action urge. So this is back to your question earlier, and that is, so urges to do something are a natural part of any emotion. So think about this for yourself. And I want everybody to maybe give me, like, when you're feeling sad, what is the urge, the behavioral urge for you to do? So eat, sleep, yeah, cry, go for a walk, isolation, okay, spend money. I'm gonna call me when you're feeling sad. I'm gonna go and hang out with you. Oh, I see. Okay, all right, okay, that's right. So that every emotion has an action urge. And they'll be different for different people. And typically what we see is the isolation, the eating, the going to sleep, those sorts of things. And then we also definitely things like spending money, going for walks, and stuff like that. So it doesn't have to be. So if we see that you're starting to isolate, it doesn't mean that, okay, like everybody's going to isolate. A lot of people do isolate when they're sad, but it doesn't mean that everybody's going to show their action urge in the same way. But the idea is to teach the kids that we're working with to put a break. Because again, we are creatures of mindless repetition. We live lives of mindless repetition. We live lives of habit. So I get sad, I go to bed. I get sad, I go to bed. I get sad, I go to bed. I repeat this behavior over and over and over and over again, and now I get sad and I go to bed. And so, do you have a question? Yeah. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
What you're saying is that, like kids, they
No. That you have a particular emotion, it's not necessarily the same as everybody else's urge. It's not the same. So they have an emotion, but it's not necessarily, what they do is not necessarily the same as everybody else. It's not even necessarily between them and their friends. Go ahead.
Have like a child who does the same reaction to the same situation constantly over and over. How do you reprogram that?
Absolutely. No. Here's the thing is, but do you smoke? No. Okay, can I get you to start smoking? No? Anything I can do to get you to start smoking? How am I going to reprogram you? Because you're not smoking. You're not doing what I want you to do. The thing about it is this, is that you say, well, okay, but I don't, this is not healthy, or this is not a good thing. What I'm saying is, don't think of it as good or bad. It's just repetitive behavior. You don't smoke because you don't smoke, and that's the thing, and nobody's going to get you to change it, and most people wouldn't want you to smoke, so that we only want people to change when they're doing something that we don't like. So you say, okay, this child is doing something. Now, mostly what happens is that we do things because our brain, you're right, has been programmed just to do the things that the way that they're. And you're not going to do, the more you do something, even if it's ineffective, the better you get at doing that thing, even if it's ineffective. The more you do so. Now, when you're going to change behavior, you are going to have to make damn sure that you are reinforcing the new behavior. But any change in behavior is just difficult to do. The minute, I mean, most of us, you go to these lectures, I found this happening a lot, I'd go to these lectures, I'd be so inspired to say, that was brilliant, I'm going to do that. And I go back to work, I'll do the same thing as I've always done. Because that's what's familiar to me. And mostly, things have to be really affecting us to begin to sort of change what we want to do. So what is this child doing? Give me an example of what you were thinking in terms of a child, for example. Sure. Thank you. Yeah, no, I'm with you. Yeah. By yourself? Oh my God, there's a saint right there. Thank you. That's right. Yeah, that's it. I don't know how you do that. Okay, you give the lecture next time. Yeah.
My biggest issue is that I constantly have kids at odds. Miss he said this, Miss he said that, and then you can only pay attention to how many kids how many times, and then suddenly out of nowhere, one kid hits another kid, and then you're just like, wait, you can't do that.
Yeah.
You could possibly hurt the other student.
Yeah.
How do you deal with something
No,
like that?
look, I mean, yeah.
In
Go
a
ahead.
positive way.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, one of the things is that there comes a point at which the environment is just bigger than you. I mean, that the environment, the society, the culture that you're in is bigger than you, and no matter what you do, there's just nothing that you can do. So first of all, I appreciate that you're doing that. I mean, there are things that you can do. I mean, even within, this would be very difficult to do, but one of the things that I would do is, depending on if the school administration, even within that kind of a class, is I would say, this is something that I would do like on my unit. I'd say, those 5 boys over there, you guys weren't disruptive. You paid attention the whole time. I really appreciate it. I am going to take you to dinner or buy you a present or take you to a movie. I'm going to tell invite your parents to something special. I'm going to, whatever it is, really reward the behavior that you want. Over time, if that's reinforcing enough, it'll begin to shape the culture. But I think that you're in a very difficult situation, and I would hope that the school administration would provide either a teacher's aide, because in our groups, we always have another person who can always take a disruptive kid out of it. Because if you're trying to examine behavior, you're trying to see all these variables. When you have 26 kids, to notice all the variables that are reinforcing behavior and all that is nearly impossible. So, yeah, no, where's your school administrator? No, she's a very... She's a very good teacher. You go to keep her. Don't. If she says anything bad, you can talk to me about it. So, but it's difficult because you also, I mean, you know, you're also under your own restraints. And so, but I do think, and we have found that having an extra aid in classrooms and all that is just helpful to take, you know, deal with this if you can do it. Yeah, go ahead.
I don't have a question, but I have a comment.
Yeah.
That if you actually, as a teacher, and you have those problems, if you can have a consequence chart and explain it out to your children, make it very visual, and then you also have a reward chart that they can earn things, and it helps the problem.
So and you know what, you have to do what works for you, absolutely. But what we have found on my unit, where we've got a lot of ADHD and LD kids, is that those don't actually work because they work for the people that have normal cognitive processing. But for, you know, but if I'm, you know, if I just cannot sit still because I don't have the executive function and brain ability to sit still, that those punishments and rewards actually work against me. So we tend to individualize things a lot more. But for a lot of kids, for the typical kid, it does actually work to have some sort of expectation about, yeah, go ahead.
I had a comment to reflect that, the consequence chart. I read a really interesting paper that children, especially with a learning difficulty or ADHD, when it's constantly shown, like in a tangent method, that they are failing every day despite the efforts, they go home and they're totally demotivated. Right, and they have this emotional pitfall. So there are consequences to that.
You've got to be a little bit careful with our group of kids with ADHD, LD, and emotion regulation problems because of this issue, is that it can be like, you know, and especially worse if lots of other kids can do it and you can't. It's like, oh God, you know, it's like so demoralizing. It can be. So but if in your classroom it's working, what I'm saying, stick to what works, because you're the observer, you're the scientist, be the scientist. If you're noticing that it works. But you've got to then pay attention, make sure that there isn't a kid that you're losing somewhere along the way. Yeah, go ahead.
I have a question.
Okay. Are you at the same school as the other lady?
No, I'm in a different school.
Okay.
I have a student. He's in grade 6.
Yeah.
He has ADHD.
Right.
But he's the only child like that has ADHD from like compared to the rest of the students. He also has social problems.
Mm-hmm.
One of his social problems, he can't get along with other students. Mm-hmm. He snaps suddenly. Another thing, he mimics the teacher. Like, he can't control himself. Other than that, he tries to get attention. For example, if he sneezes or something, like, he has to do something to get other people's attention. That obviously distracts the other students, and that distracts the lesson. What are other effective ways that I can deal with him other than just giving him a look or giving him an eye contact so that he understands what's going on?
Okay, so, well, I think a couple of things. People will only ever do behavior that's reinforced over time. Behavior that doesn't have the desired effect, you're going to stop doing. If I want to, walk to the other side of this room and try to do this, I'm not going to get through because there's no door here, and so eventually I'll stop and I'll, try and do something else. So there's something reinforcing about the kid sneezing or whatever it is. Maybe what happens is that the only moment of light in his entire life is when the other kids laugh and he thinks, okay, I got a laughter. I feel a little bit better about myself in that moment. So the question is, how do you catch the child doing more of what you want when they're not expecting it? How can you pull him out and say, you know what, I noticed today that you didn't sneeze, and I have to tell you how proud I was of you, how happy I was, and all of those things. Have those one-on-one moments. How can you reinforce behavior that you want? Now, it's difficult in a classroom because, that kids are going to do it. And it's very difficult when you have a very disruptive kid to not pay attention to that kid, because really what you want to do is you want to extinguish that behavior by not reinforcing. Unfortunately, you can't control what the other kids are going to do. So if they laugh, then that's not helpful. But you see, when we have those kinds of kids, those kids would be also getting, maybe, and we're going to be talking about this greater, about providing special educational services outside of the classroom. Because if it's very disruptive, it's disruptive to you and to a lot of the other students in terms of learning. And many of those kids are put into special, in the States, special education classes.
The thing is, like, okay, you're trying to tell me to sit with him and basically talk to him, right?
No. I don't want you to do that at all, because then you're doing therapy and it's going to drive you insane.
Yeah,
and then you're
exactly.
going to come to me and say I've gone crazy. I don't want you to do that. I want you to notice when he does something that when the behavior that you want, when he's doing something that is really effective. Now, people are going to do, by their own natural inclination, things that interest him. So if he is interested in art, and you're teaching history, maybe you could say, hey, look, everybody's learning history. I want you to draw what it is. So, and then he says, oh, good, I like art, and then he's drawing, he's less disruptive. I really like that you were paying attention. So I don't want you to talk to him. All I want you to do is catch him doing behavior, because he's not disruptive the entire class, right? There are times when he's settled.
He's not, not all the time, but...
Is there any time that you like him?
Yeah. Oh my God.
No, but it gets difficult, because some of these kids, after a while, you start not to like them. And you've got to be honest about that within yourself. It's like, you think about work, and you think, man, I got that kid in my class, and he's really annoying,
The thing is, I can't understand him. I can't understand how he feels, because even when I do try to talk to him, which I've done a couple of times, he does not like to be talked. Even when I come near him and try to talk to him, he doesn't like eye contact.
Well, the other thing is, and we were talking about this at other situations, is what's the assessment of the child? Maybe this is a child who's on the spectrum with ADHD and other things, and maybe he has more than what you're trained to teach or intervene at, you're capable of delivering, and he might need much more of a delivery system. So in the States, a kid like that would be evaluated within by standardized tests, and we're going to try and talk about this. And I think that ultimately the hope is that kids like this have a reliable battery of tests that can be delivered, and then services provided, because you aren't the only one. So you're doing the best that you can. So the only other thing is, I would just say, when you notice within yourself seeing a moment that you really like, I would really point it out to the kid.
Thank you.
Okay, welcome. All right. Now, it was very funny because, exactly. I went to. I was teaching somewhere in Africa, and I said, what's the reaction urge? And they say, man, I want more of those. I said, what the hell are you talking about? He said, oh no, we eat those all the time. I said, okay, that wasn't what I was trying to teach, What's that?
We have a lot of students in our class.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, that's funny. But and it's so even for disgust, like if you smell something rotten. This one's almost universal. I want you to think of something really disgusting. Come on, show me your faces. You think of something really disgusting. Yeah? The upper lip goes up, the lower jaw weakens. Why? Because it's repulsion, it's disgust. You're going to throw up. And the body has to do that in order to survive. It's universal. That's what I'm saying. It's not going to be... any different. But again, the action urge may be different, because if you find that that's a tasty worm, then, So again, in the same way, if I were to start to learn Arabic, for instance, I'd have to break it down into its tiny little component pieces, so that you have to break down this idea that we have all these emotions, and that all these emotions have names. Then also that I can feel a little bit sad or a lot sad. You also have to pay attention to what was going on in the environment for that emotion to show up. So I was feeling sad in the context of being at school and getting bullied or whatever it is, and my sadness level was high, whatever it was. And then what do I say to myself about this emotion? So we talk about we're going to learn to observe and describe, and this is we're going to get away from the mindless life. We're going to get into much more paying attention to our minds and to our experiences. Then to name it, what are the sensations in my body? I'm feeling tense. I'm crying. Heart rate, stomach. What is my body language? I had a very interesting intervention. My staff nearly killed me for this one, but there was this girl, and she walks around like this. And she says, I said, so what do you need help with? She says, no one likes me. I said, well, of course no one likes you. You don't look at anyone. You walk around like this. Here's what I want you to do. Come on, shoulders up, chin up, look at me in the eye, and just say good morning, And she said, you think that's going to make a difference? I said, try it, and she tried it for a few days. But just even that body posture, it's incredible. I do this exercise with a lot of our parents and with a kid. If you think about a problem that you have in your life, let's just do this. Actually, we're going to do this. I want you to think not the worst problem, not whether you should, move to Australia. I don't want you to think about the worst, but just a problem, a conflict that you're having with your spouse, with one of your children, with a colleague, with a teacher, just like a small little problem, and saying, something like this, maybe saying, should I talk to my colleague about it? Should I reprimand my child? Should I, whatever it is. So I want you to do this, and we'll just do this for a few seconds, and I'll say switch. So the first thing I want you to do, I want you to think about this question that you're having. I want you to clench your fists. I want you to sit forward, and in your mind, just say the word no. Okay? So we'll do this for about 30 seconds. So everybody have a question about some conflict in their mind? You got a conflict? Okay. So clench your fists. Lean forward and tighten your muscles, and just say no. Just in your mind. Don't speak it out loud. Okay, now what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to sit up, put both feet on the ground, chin up, put your hands face up on your laps, and just in your mind, same question, just say yes. Okay, now let me ask you this question. Who experienced, just by show of hands, an emotional or physiological difference in that question between those two states? Anybody? Did it feel different? Now, it might be good or it might be bad. I'm not saying that it's good or bad. It could go either way. But I'm just saying that there's a difference. And so what I'm saying is that you can do these little things that are going to change. Like if you smile, that's just going to change how your brain works. So yeah, we had a couple of hands. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah. Oh, you've had, right. So, so just how you change your posture, sit up, do things differently, is going to change how your own internal brain workings are. Then, what is my action urge? What do I want to do? What would be the outcome of acting on my urge? So again, you're getting these kids to start to slow down. First of all, naming, noticing, all of these sorts of things. Now, and then, okay, if I go and I hit that kid, what's that going to do? But it's, you know, I mean, this is hard enough for any of us to do. Someone who's got ADHD and LD, we're asking them to use, you know, executive function to deal with emotions. And remember, the more emotional you become, the further you get from the cortex. The more anxious you become, the further you get from the cortex. The cortex is, sometimes I think of God's joke on us, because it just spends all this time, you know, thinking and, you know, making all of these things and getting us into sort of a lot of trouble. But what you want, you know, you're asking someone who's emotionally dysregulated, the more emotional you become, the further you get from the cortex. But you're asking a child to use cognitive skills over here to deal with something that's going on over here. The emotional, the limbic system has no language. It's very visceral. You have to use visceral techniques to get thinking back online. You want thinking to get back online. You know, like you get someone who's really angry and he says, well, you know, I don't know that you should be so angry. Well, why are you so angry, you know? This doesn't make a lot of sense. He says, well, calm down. Well, I would do that if I could, you know. It's like, because you're not, it's not a rational thought process. It's really going on deep down inside. Now, I just want to ask where's Dr. Shaban? Is she? So, noticing that it's 3, should we give, like if people need to go to the bathroom or something like that, should we give them like a 5-minute break or do people need like a 5-minute break just to go to the bathroom or get a 10-minute break? Okay. All right. So why don't we, five, yeah.
5 it won't be enough. I would go for, if you would like to go for a break, I would go for.
Yeah, so to take okay. So why don't we just, so that, you know, you can take a breath, think a little bit about, come up with some questions if you want, and then we can get on with the slides, but just go and take a bit of a break and we can come back.